Something I find interesting, and I think this is actually a good point. We refer to this event by two names. Sometimes it's called a daily stand-up, and sometimes it's called a daily scrum. Now, it's really both terms are intended to be the same thing, but daily scrum is actually the preferred name. And the reason is a daily stand-up implies that it's a status meeting. And uh, while this meeting does convey status, the daily scrum is a little more focused and it implies that, yeah, we're giving information, but this is very, very short. So again, welcome. Uh, I'm sorry, I know I'm gonna mispronounce your name, but Awani. Uh, Again, feel free to ask questions at any point, and we are recording this. We'll make it available on YouTube tomorrow. So let's dive right in. Let's go through some of the details. Oops. Um, what is the daily stand-up meeting? Well, first of all, the stand-up meeting, some of its attributes is this is what we call a time-boxed meeting, meaning that it has a very fixed time, and our goal is to share our individual status in this meeting, but to do it very, very concisely, very quickly, and very to the point. So there's not a lot of room in this meeting for any outside discussion at all. Uh, Everyone that participates gets 1 to 2 minutes, and that's it. Now, any issues that come up in the daily scrum or the daily stand-up, as it's also referred to, uh, in the scrum meeting, you just identify, okay, here's an issue. Here are the teammates who are best equipped to help resolve that issue or resolve that blocker. And then you go on. You can, after this meeting is done, you can meet with those individuals to resolve the issue. So it should be at the same place and the same time each day. So, you don't want to waste any time scheduling this. It's best to find a time to do this, the same time and the same place every day. So you schedule it once as a repeating meeting rather than trying to schedule it individually each and every day or each and every week. And that could be a challenge, especially in a larger organization where uh, team members may be participating in multiple projects, uh, but it is doable. It is facilitated by the Scrum Master. So if anyone here is a Scrum Master, this is a skill that you will build at Chingu. Your job is to basically make this meeting go quickly, but at the same time to make sure that your team members are given an opportunity to answer these three questions, and that they do it in a way that basically shares their true status with the rest of the team. So this does require that everyone on the team participate. Uh, Now that's for the majority of the time. In every team, someone may be ill that day and may not be at work, or they may be on vacation. What's important is that as with a lot of the events that we do in Chingu, since we're remote, what's important isn't that you're there at every single meeting, but in this case, that you share your status ahead of time and that you let your team know what your availability is. You need to let them know if you'll be attending. So absolutely, you should not skip the meeting just because, oh, I don't feel like going to the meeting today. No, you need to have a valid reason for not attending. And in the three main questions to focus on, and this is what makes this meeting so short, what you're really answering is this question: what did I complete yesterday, and what did I do yesterday? The second question is, what am I going to work on today? And then the third question is there anything that's blocking your progress? Is there something that like could be an issue, like a problem? It could be a poorly defined requirement that you've uncovered that you need more details on. It's anything that's preventing you from completing the tasks that you committed to complete in the current sprint. And again, when you uncover issues or problems, the whole point of this meeting is not to try to solve the problem in the meeting. The point is, or your goal is, identify who in the team can help you, and then agree to meet after this meeting is concluded to actually do the work of resolving the issue. Oops. So the other really interesting byproduct of the daily Scrum meeting is, it is a way to motivate and support your team members. Um, the other thing that can happen out of this is quite often, especially in a project like a Chingu Voyage, where everyone on the team is, you're building your experience. So you're not typically Chingus aren't very far in their journey to become web development or software development professionals. So there are a lot of things that this may be the first time you're encountering them. So as a result, Chingus tend to be a little shy sometimes. So, but having this meeting helps to motivate you, and it helps to build a lot of trust within the team when you see that, oh, well, I can say I'm having a problem, and people aren't attacking me because I have a problem. What they're doing is they're volunteering to help me resolve that issue. So this is a way to motivate teams. And I've seen this same point time and again out in the workplace in teams that I've been on in companies. So any questions or comments or thoughts before we move on? And as Andres is famous for saying, don't think that you should go easy on me and not ask questions. If you have a question or again a concern, I guarantee that someone else in this meeting has the same question or the same concern. And our purpose here is to help you answer those questions. So don't be shy. All right, let's move on. So this is just one of several Scrum events. A Scrum event, it's really a phrase that describes meetings that are unique to the Scrum Agile framework. So, we've got the daily Scrum as the second line here, but we also have the sprint planning meeting and the sprint review and the sprint retrospective. So one of the differences between the daily Scrum and these other meetings or the other events are that the other events occur once within a sprint, but the daily Scrum is just that. It's a daily event. And what it shows is its whole purpose is to let everyone on the team know what's the progress towards our sprint goal. Now, you may be asking, well, what's the goal of the sprint? Well, in the sprint planning session, that's where you set the sprint goal. That's where you identify what are the product backlog items, the tasks that we need to complete in this sprint. And people on the team volunteer or are assigned to work on them. Well, that's ultimately your goal. Your goal for the sprint is to complete the sprint tasks. Now, there's some adaptation or some changes that may come out of the daily Scrum. And those changes affect the sprint backlog and your daily plans. And specifically, remember that Agile adapts to change. What it does is it recognizes that change is going to occur and it actually embraces change rather than having the team or someone on the team fill out a complicated change request form when you see that, oh, well, something in the application requirements need to be refined, you don't do that. You basically you identify in the daily scrum as a team, you identify what needs to be changed, and then the scrum master and the product owner will take care of making sure that the backlog is updated to reflect that change and that any daily plans are updated as well. Now, let's just for a minute talk about what could one of those changes look like. Well, something that's very common is that at the beginning of the project, when you define your product backlog, a product backlog, contains all of the epics, the user stories, and the tasks that represent the work that needs to be completed to reach your minimum viable product. Well, at the time you define that at the beginning of the voyage, you don't necessarily have all of the details or all of the information. You've got requirements from your end users. In the case of a voyage, uh, you've got the requirements that we've provided for the voyage project. But there are a lot of questions that can come up about, well, how do you interpret those, or is there some other bit of information that you need to make that requirement actionable? Well, when you actually, as a developer or a UI UX designer or product owner or scrum master, when you start working on one of those tasks in the sprint, you're going to do the detailed design and the detailed analysis of what's required. And as a result, you may find that something that's listed as a user story is actually a much larger bit of work. Let's say that you have a user story that says we want to create a profile page. Well, as a user story, the goal is to try to complete that in one sprint or at most two sprints. But when you think about a profile page, there's a lot of work behind that. First of all, you have to have some place to store that profile data. So if you're a full stack team, that could be, hey, we've got to put this in a Postgres or a Mongo database, which means we have to define a schema. We have to create the database. We have to create test data to load into it. And, and then when you look at the actual profile screen itself, it's not one bit of user functionality. It's at least three. Because it's what we call a CRUD application, a create, retrieve, update, or delete functionality has to be included. You're going to have a function that adds a new profile, a different user function that updates an existing profile, and a third function that deletes a profile. So that one user story we started out with is probably an epic that has at least four user stories underneath it. One to create the database and load the test data, create the schema, all of that. One for the add function, one for the update function, and one for the delete function. So that's an example of where some adaptation to your plans can come about through a daily Scrum meeting. So any questions on that before we go on? I realize that was a lot of words. Yeah, now again, just real quickly to compare Agile and Scrum to older project management methodologies in what we call the waterfall system, which was used from the early 1950s up through today. It's still used by some organizations. In waterfall, you did all of the design, and once all of the design was completed, then you did all of the coding. And once the coding was completed, you did all of the testing and so on. Well, what would happen is that if you're in coding and you discover that, oh, something is more complicated, or maybe you discover the design has an error, what would happen is the whole project would stop. You'd go back to the design and you correct the design before you resume coding. Well, as a result, a lot of project management frameworks, like PMP, for example, they include very complicated change management procedures because really they don't intend it to be this way, but what actually happens is those change management procedures are trying to push change away. They're trying to delay change, whether they intend to or not, because you need change management orders that are approved by a change management board. It just gets complicated. Well, Agile tries to correct that by, again, this business of embracing change and in a sprint, allowing you to do things like, you know, refine your backlog. So, questions at all? I just find it really interesting that waterfall, when it's taken to an extreme, of basically resisting change. That's why you see projects that go all the way to completion, and then when they're deployed, the users say, "Well, this isn't what I want, what I wanted," or maybe it's this particular function. I need this function, and it's not there. Well, in some cases, it's because you know the change management procedures in waterfall made making changes really difficult, even when they were valid changes, something that needed to change. Yes, Nika, go ahead.
Good morning, thank you. So I have actually remembered that I went to one of like networking events, and there I met a backend developer who told me that he actually quit his previous workplace because they were trying to adopt Agile, and he was really against it. So I was wondering if you could have an advice for like having such a developer on a team. Is there anything that could be done to retain them, or is it just go separate paths at this point?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and it's something that does come up there and it's not just developers. Sometimes it's end users as well. When they're first exposed to Agile or Scrum, it's a different way of thinking, and so there's some resistance. I've implemented Scrum at two different companies, and in both cases, actually three different companies, in all three cases, what I found is it took 12 to 18 months to implement Scrum. And what we found is the team I was on is we did it in stages. We didn't try to teach everyone, here's everything about Scrum and start using it right now. What we did is we phased it in bits at a time. Because Scrum and Agile, it's a mindset. Uh, Waterfall, waterfall is more like a checklist. It's a procedure you follow. And while Scrum does have steps that you have to follow, you basically it's a you're orienting your view around, hey, we're gonna accept change. We're gonna do things in small iterations, your sprints, and we're gonna deliver functionality in these increments. And we're going to include the end users in each of those increments so we get their immediate feedback. Now, a lot of times developers, they resist this, and especially the daily Scrum they resist, because until they adopt that mindset, until they can see what Scrum and Agile delivers, they view it as taking away time from coding. Coding is for developers, coding is always more fun than typically, testing and attending meetings and all of those things. So um, now at Chingu, a bit of advice back to your original question, if there's resistance to using Scrum, we chose Scrum because it is the most popular Agile framework that's out there. Agile is a methodology Scrum is one implementation of that methodology, and there are others like test-driven development and extreme programming. Scrum's the most popular, and since our goal is to help Chingus prepare and to build experience for the job market, we stress Scrum because chances are that's what you're going to encounter when you actually start your job. Now, it is interesting. I've seen some companies like, uh, well, Capgemini was one actually, and this was a very specific project, and this project was 13 years ago, so or 12 years ago, um, actually a little bit longer than that. They were using Scrum, but they didn't call it Scrum at the time. And the reason they didn't is because of the resistance that uh, the client would have raised around it. So they basically followed Scrum, but they didn't call it Scrum. And it was adopted very readily by the company. And it was implemented at the company I worked at. And it was implemented in pieces over time. Now, that was a fairly long running project. It took a year for us to do the design because it was so complicated. And then it took another really 2 years to actually implement uh, the application and deploy it to the end users. So that was a little bit of a special case, but that's one approach that I know one company did. So did that help, Nika?
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Because you mentioned Capgemini, so so I will be working for Capgemini's client, and
Right.
yeah, they are gathering the team. So I do wonder if I might experience some resistance, and I do appreciate you sharing. Thank you.
Oh, not a problem. Yeah, and at Capgemini, you probably won't, my guess is that you won't get resistance from within Capgemini because all of the major consulting firms, they use Scrum. At least the ones up like E&Y and Capgemini and Accenture, those. Uh, they may not use it on every project, and each of them has their own variation of Scrum that they use. But chances are you won't get resistance there. Where you might see resistance is at the customer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, we'll see. So far they seem to be all very nice.
Yeah. Now the other kind of uh, side comment on this, at the companies I've worked at, in all three of them, we found it really useful to train not just the development teams or the infrastructure, IT infrastructure teams in Scrum. We actually had versions of the training that we used for executives, for the accountants, the financial people who were monitoring the project, and the end users. Essentially, everyone that was a stakeholder on the project, we brought them into Scrum, and we tried to change their mindset, how they view projects, as well as we did for the core development team. And that had a lot of benefits. And that's why it sometimes takes so long to implement Scrum. That's why it took a year to 18 months, because there were a lot of different people involved. And executives think differently from end users who think differently from finance people. We had to create custom training for each type of stakeholder that we were bringing onto the project. So, any other questions or comments or concerns? Yeah, exactly. Interfaces for stakeholders. All right, let's move on. So again, just to reiterate, we're using two terms interchangeably here. We're saying daily scrum and daily stand up. They are the same thing. Um, and the daily scrum is actually what scrum.org prefers this meeting to be called. And their reasoning is that daily stand up implies more status. so that if you're calling a daily stand-up, that invites, that invites the team to basically talk more and get outside of that time box. Whereas Scrum is, a Scrum in rugby, it's typically very quick. It's where everyone gets together and to try to capture the ball, and so it's very fast. But again, I've been at companies. In some cases, it's daily Scrum. In some cases, it's daily stand up. But it's the same thing. Okay. So how do you run the daily Scrum? What's the meeting look like? Well, again, it's moderated or facilitated by a Scrum Master. And this can be a very difficult job for Scrum Masters because if you think about it, in many cases, their job is to be the bad guy. They're ensuring that team members uh, they're answering those three questions and they're doing it very concisely, very in a very short way. Uh, but at the same time, they're also making sure that the team members are being accurate in their answers to those three questions. So that means the Scrum Master has to keep fairly good notes on each of these daily meetings. And they have to remember that, well, if someone reports a vastly different status today than they did yesterday, the Scrum Master may have to follow up after the meeting to find out, okay, is the status accurate? Or they may want to ask a question in the current meeting about, hey, what you said this yesterday, and that your status is different today. What changed? But still trying to keep it time boxed and very short. And I've as a Scrum Master, I've let my teams know within every daily Scrum in the first 2 or 3 sprints, depending on the length of the sprint, I've let them know that my job is to make this go very quickly to get the most information we can shared across the team in the shortest amount of time. So that means I may be asking you, hold on to that thought. We'll look at that after the meeting. So the intent is I want them to know I'm not trying to be rude when I jump in like that, but we want to keep the meeting, focused. So again, every teammate, we've really talked about this. They answer these three questions. What are you working on now? Which includes if you finish something, you want to report, oh, since the last daily scrum, I finished this. But what am I working on? What am I going to work on next? And what's blocking my progress if there's anything? Now, something for everyone in the meeting to really pay attention to, if you see a team member who is reporting that they're working on the same thing for multiple days, they're going to continue working on that same thing, but they're not reporting any blockers, it could be that they're fighting a problem and they're not making progress, but because they take ownership in it and pride in the work, they're not reporting that it's a blocker. They want to solve it themselves. So when you see that there's not movement, and this is a job of the Scrum Master as well as every team member, that's a good opportunity to ask a question. Hey, is there something that's slowing you down? Is there some problem you're hitting that you need help with? So rather than waiting for them to say, hey, I'm having a problem, it's your opportunity to ask them from the other direction. And a lot of times, what I've seen is, and I've done this myself, I don't want to give up working on a problem. I want to try to solve it myself. But when someone asks me, do I have a problem? Then it's like the floodgates open. Then I will share, oh, yeah, here's what I'm experiencing, and so on. And again, when something like that happens, when a blocker is identified in the meeting, The goal is not to solve it in the meeting. The goal is to identify who else on the team is best equipped to help this person, and then they can get together after the daily scrum to work on the problem. Yeah, which is what I just said. So again, the daily scrum, it's not complicated. Again, the goal, really the goal, while it is to keep it short and actionable, it's also to convey the most information in the shortest amount of time, but also it's kind of wider goal here. You're making everyone on the team visible to all the information. So you're not holding anything back from anyone on the team. We're going to talk a little more depth in a minute about that to give you some more background. But any questions up to this point? Okay. So let's talk about the benefits. So the shared perspective is really important. You're making information visible to everyone on the team, but you're also seeing how do other people in different roles than you, like if you're a web developer, you're able to see here's how the UI UX person is what work they are doing and how they're doing it. Um, and so that's really important because if you understand the perspective someone in a different role has, your communication with them and your teamwork that you have with them is going to be more efficient. Now, Andres had asked who should attend the daily stand up. In a strict Scrum environment, the attendees are the Scrum Master and the development team. But I found this true. This is true at Chingu, but I've also done this in companies. I like to include the product owner. I don't like to include like finance people or the end users, but I do like to include product owner. If there are QA people, I like to include them. It's basically anyone involved with the core development. Um, and I think there's a lot of advantages to having the Scrum Master and the product owner basically answer those three questions as well. Because again, it lets you see, well, what is their job? So you get a better appreciation for what they're bringing to the team. But the other thing is it gives them the ability to set the standard for, how do you answer those questions? So it's kind of a leadership thing on the part of the PO and the Scrum Master, to lead the team in this. So the other benefit is that you end up finding the best answer for questions and problems. Now, again, you're not answering questions or resolving problems in the meeting. You're identifying when one of these come up, who are the best people on the team to help with those. And that's what's important. The other thing that's interesting is that by doing it that way, and because it's daily, you tend to resolve issues and questions much faster because the whole team sees them at the time that they come up. Again, it helps keeps teams in sync. This is really important because even though we're all individually working on different parts of the application, we need to be in sync because all these different parts and pieces have to work together to provide value to the end user. So a couple examples of this is the UI UX designer will create, a wireframe and potentially, styling guidelines, color guidelines, all of that. Well, what I've seen in a lot of projects is the UI UX designer will do that in the early sprints of a project, and then they basically kind of drop off. Their workload drops off. But I think it's really important that the UI UX designers stay engaged so that they can see what is it that the front end team is actually implementing Are they following the, the design? So the UI UX designer can help identify when there are variances between what's implemented and the design. It also makes them available so that when the front end team, when there's a question or when they run into a problem and they think the design needs to be modified, well, the UI UX designer is there and engaged. Now, a second example is between a front end team and a back end team. If I'm a back end developer that's writing an API route to supply data to the front end, and Nika is a front end developer, well, in the status meeting, if she hears me call a route by a name that's different from what she's expecting, she can call that out in the meeting. And what that will do is that prevents a mismatch later on when we actually get into testing. You know, when I PR my API route into development and she PRs her front end in integration testing, we don't want to find the case where the front end is failing because the route name they're using is undefined in the back end. Or actually, in that example, you know, she would find that in unit testing as well, most likely. But again, these are two examples of why it's important to stay in sync. It also creates accountability. You know, if I'm daily saying, well, I'm working on this, and here's what I'm working on next, you know, I'm accountable to complete that work. So this creates a little bit of what would we call this? We'd call it healthy kind of friction in a way. You know, it helps to keep team members honest and not just honest, but really focused on what it is they need to deliver and to deliver it in a timely fashion. Because everyone on the team sees what it is I'm committing to. Again, we talked about transparency and teamwork. Um, it builds both of those because everyone on the team knows what everyone else is working on. Now, they don't have to know the details, but again, Nika is going to know I'm the person that's writing the API route that she's going to use in the front end. Well, if a question comes up, that level of transparency allows her to DM me or to contact me at any point with questions she may have, or vice versa. And in the teamwork side of this, uh, you know, if we're all, you know, we're asking questions and we're volunteering to help our teammates, it just helps strengthen the team. And because we're doing it on a daily basis, we're getting this kind of reinforcement every single day of the project. It also encourages personal planning and time management. You know, if I'm reporting my status every day, basically what I'm doing is it keeps me focused on reaching my sprint goal. But to do that, it also uh, encourages me to basically be efficient and to plan my time so that I'm actually working on these things. Sometimes it's easy when you don't have frequent meetings like this. It's easy for someone to say, well, yeah, I'm working on this task, but uh, I want to go to the football match today, or I want to watch it on TV, so I'll work on this tomorrow. And then tomorrow something else comes up, and then the day after something else, and before you know it, you're at the deadline date, and you haven't done any of the work, or you haven't completed it. Again, there's also high visibility of progress. That this falls into transparency, but having that visibility on progress for the whole team, it lets everyone know when there is a problem that's occurring. And so the team can devote the resources needed to resolve those problems. You know, it could be that the library we're using has a bug and we have to find a workaround for that. It also supports self-organization. The Scrum Master in high performing teams, the Scrum Master doesn't have to say, Andres, will you work with Dinesh on this problem he's having? What will happen is team members, when they hear that there's a blocker, if they know a lot about that particular topic, whatever it is, they'll volunteer. So that's an example of the team kind of, taking ownership of the project and the responsibility into their own hands. And that's actually a really good attribute for teams to have, rather than waiting on a manager to say, you go work on this and you go work on that. And I should add that the self-organization and visibility, teamwork, all of this helps to build trust within the team. And trust is actually, one of the foundations of teamwork. If you don't trust your teammates, it makes it really hard to work in a team. Now, again, a kind of an overarching attribute of this is that when you're doing the daily Scrum meeting correctly, um, it helps to coordinate everyone's activities. And if you don't have this level of coordination, then you're going to end up with chaos. You don't want to be in this case where, again, this front end and back end with the API route naming thing. You don't want to be in the case where you're in the last sprint and you find that the front end's not working because it's using a different API route or maybe a different parameter on the route than what the back end team has implemented. Or that the back end team, the data they're delivering is different from the data that's expected. Questions? Does anyone have any other benefits that you've seen out of daily Scrum meetings? Okay, let's move on then. So there are some optimizations for Chingu, and actually some of these are beyond Chingu. They're just general optimizations. But the first and most important for Chingu is that in our voyages, everyone is remote. It's been extremely rare that we found Chingus in the same region where they can physically meet with one another. Now, oddly or interesting, we have had a few teams where husbands and wives have participated on the same team, and in that case, they obviously have been side by side when they're working on the project. But for the most part, everyone in the team is in a different location. And as a result, it's sometimes really hard to schedule a real-time stand-up meeting or real-time Scrum meeting every day. Um, and so some things that teams have done is they have created a daily stand-up topic or thread in their team channel, and they've posted their status to that every single day at about the same time so that everyone on the team can read that status and know where their teammates are at. Now, another variation is that I've seen teams that have been able to schedule a stand up, like every other day or every third day. And what they've done is they post to the team channel their status on the days where there's no real-time meeting, but then on the days where they do have the real-time meeting, that obviously becomes their daily stand-up. That's a really good kind of hybrid approach to having a meeting every single day. Again, use that team channel. In Discord, your team channels are what are called forum channels. So you can create specific topics. You can create essentially a thread called Daily Standup. And I'll show you, I think most of you are aware of this now, but let's show you. Uh, there is uh, a Discord command that Andres wrote called /standup. Oh, you're not seeing my screen. So let me change screen so you can see what I'm seeing. Here we go. It should switch in just a minute. It's thinking. There we go. So this daily stand-up command, you in your team channel, and let's say you've created a daily stand-up thread. In that thread, in the Discord command or message area, you just type daily stand-up, or you just type stand-up. And what it will do is it presents a dialogue with these three questions. So uh, yesterday, I confused Mika. Today, what I'm going to be working on is I'm going to confuse Nika again. And do I have any blockers? Yes, Nika is confused. So obviously I'm doing this as a joke, but what you would really put in is yesterday you would do high level status. You would say, yesterday I worked on unit testing of the profile ad task. Um, Today, I'm going to complete that that unit testing and create a PR for this function. And then, do I have any blockers? You know, if I do, I'll list what that blocker is. Now, one suggestion is when you post your status, especially in these first two. But if I said something like, "I'm going to," I confused Nika. Let me change this to actually be something a little real. But I would say, I
That's very
started unit.
real.
With me, it is, yeah. I started unit testing of the profile add function or add functionality. What you could do is if you're using Jira or even GitHub projects to manage your backlog, you could put in, here's the issue number. It's issue 112. Or you could put in the link to a URL link to your backlog. That will help people if they had a question about this task, they could actually go look at that task in the backlog. But when I submit this, you can see what it does is it posts this formatted answers in the channel. So everyone with access to that channel can see this or that thread. Is there any questions about the daily stand-up command? Let's see. Oh yeah, no problems. All right, let's minimize this. Let's go back to the presentation. There we go. So you also want to stress accomplishments over the technical details. In other words, you want to de-emphasize those technical details because if you need to discuss the details with someone, then you can schedule time with them, or you can post your questions or your information in your team channel after the daily Scrum meeting is over. Uh, what you're trying to do is to summarize your activity in a meaningful way so that everyone on the team can understand it. Again, the thing to focus on as a participant in the meeting is focus on what are who are the teammates, or they seem to be having some slow progress, or they've reported something that is a really serious blocker. And the reason you focus on that is not for blame. The goal is not to say, "Oh, Andres, you're just working too slow." The goal is to identify and to ask, Andres, can I help in some way? Because remember, as a team, you individually as a teammate, you are not going to fail or succeed unless everyone else on the team is failing or succeeding. You're not going to succeed if the rest of the team is failing. That's not the definition of teamwork. So this is an opportunity to help one another. Again, we stress this, all teammates must participate. However you're sharing your status, everyone should participate. And as a Voyager, prior to the voyage, everyone completed a commitment form where you committed to, being an active participant, posting daily status, participating in all the meetings. So, and we don't create those requirements because we just think, oh, we can create them. It's our way to boss you around. Those are things that when you actually get out in the workplace and you're on your job, you'll find that those are the requirements of the job, and that's what we're trying to help you prepare for. And by the way, for something like a daily status on an interview, if you're in an interview, this is something that's really good to bring up. That in a voyage we not only built this app, we not only used our technical knowledge or the knowledge that pertinent to our role to help make our team a success, but here's a very specific thing that I helped with. I participated in these stand-ups, and these are what we accomplished through those stand-ups, because that shows you have experience that other applicants probably don't have. Again, keep it focused. Um, a lot of times, developers, we've got this, or any technical role, we've got this phrase called going down the rabbit hole, which comes from the Alice in Wonderland book. Well, going down the rabbit hole means you get tied up in a technical detail and you start talking about it. And before you know it, the meeting is off track because you're talking about a technical detail rather than sharing status. It's good and it's okay to share those details, just not in the stand-up meeting. And in fact, one optimization that some teams have done is they've scheduled a meeting for later in the sprint that's an open topic meeting. That way, if you need to discuss something or share something, or if the whole team needs to work on a problem or an issue, you've got time to do that. So that's a good meeting to basically share those kinds of details. And again, I've repeated myself, but this is a trap that every team I've ever worked on has fallen into, and I fall into it myself. Is that in the meeting when you identify an issue, the goal of the meeting is to identify who to work with to solve the meeting or solve the issue after the meeting. But again, do it outside of the daily scrum or the stand-up meeting. You don't want to use the meeting to solve everyone's individual issue. Any questions? Questions, comments, anything at all? Yeah, Andres, why would I work faster? Okay. The other thing here is don't forget that two parts of Scrum that are, or a part of Scrum, I should say, that's really important is the retrospective. The retrospective is an event. In fact, let's go back to it. Now I wish I hadn't animated this. The retrospective is where, as a team, you talk about not the application, but how you're working together to create the application. So the retrospective, this is where you identify, how could you work more efficiently or work faster with one another, or is there something that's working really well and you want to note that I'd call attention to it so you continue to do that. But this retrospective is how you get better in sprint after sprint as after sprint. So if you're finding that, oh, our daily stand-ups are taking an hour and a half instead of 15 minutes, that would be something really good to discuss in a retrospective because that's an area where your team could improve. So now that I went all through that, we get to go back through. So we're actually at the end. That's what we wanted to cover today is the importance of the daily stand-up. And kind of back to your original question, Nika, about developers that resist Scrum. This is the first place that I typically see people resisting is in that daily stand-up and giving their status in this way. And if you want to learn more about Scrum, about any part of Scrum, uh, the definitive website uh, for Scrum is scrum.org. It was created by one of the founders of Scrum, one of the creators of Scrum, Ken Schwaber. So it has a lot of really good free resources where you can use to answer questions about Scrum or just learn more about Scrum. So I want to open this up now to questions about what we talked about today, or comments, or anything at all that you're about Chingu or Voyages or solo project. Anything you may have a question about or a problem with that you're experiencing.
If I may, it's not relevant, but I just wanted to share that for the first time, I was basically like I am helping Team Forward to write some tests, and this is the first time that I am writing tests for code that I did not write myself, and so basically I wrote tests that were passing where they should be failing, and I spent 2 days going absolutely crazy thinking that I don't know how to write tests. But it turns out I uncovered a bug and I was actually useful. So yeah, I just wanted to share this experience as a tester. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good achievement. I'm glad you shared that. That's something to celebrate, actually. The other thing is don't fall into this is true for everyone. Don't fall into the trap of when you're working on those kind of long issues where it takes days to resolve it. Don't fall into the trap of thinking, oh, I failed because this took 2 days. Well, number one, it could be a really serious problem or a very complicated problem that took that amount of time. But what's more important is not the amount of time it took to resolve it, but what can you learn from that? And what did you learn from that? What we found at Chingu, and I found personally, I tend to learn more from my mistakes than I do from successes because they stick with me longer. Uh, for whatever reason, I tend not to remember the successes, but man, when I'm coding, I do remember the mistakes I've made. Like, oh, I should use for of rather than for in, because of I'm dealing with objects or I'm not dealing with objects. Um, so that's something. Don't beat yourself up because you made a mistake. I think mistakes should be celebrated. The only mistake that's a problem is the one you don't learn something from. You repeat it over and over and over again. Oh, you're very welcome, Farmata. Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments? Or it's okay to disagree as well. Sometimes some of our best things we've learned is from a disagreement. Okay, it looks like there's nothing else. So what we're going to do is give you the rest of your Saturday or Sunday, depending on where you're at in the world. Uh, we'll give you your time back. Hopefully, you'll have time to work this weekend, but you'll also have time for yourself. Take care of your mental health and your physical health. Don't just work, you know, 24 hours a day. Because remember, if you aren't taking care of yourself, you can't take care of the people you love and other things in your life. Uh, let's see what else. Just news. We are coming to the end of Sprint 2 tomorrow. Sprint 3 of Voyage 55 begins Monday. So tomorrow we'll email the check-in requests and we'll post a reminder in all of the team channels. Let's see what else. Um, so far, the server that we've supplied for the Voyage project, the one that extracts the resource entries from the resource treasures channel, seems to be working well. So, but if you do have an issue with that or a question, open a ticket in the open support ticket channel, and we'll get right on that. Um, and yeah, I guess that is about it. So again, thank you everyone. I appreciate the questions and the fact you took out time from your weekend to join us. Next week, Andres is going to talk about all about SQL. So he's going to introduce what is the structured query language used for databases like Postgres and MySQL. Um, he'll do that on Wednesday and Saturday. So. Great. Thank you, everyone. We'll talk to you later. Bye bye.
Thank you.